So you're telling me that the best way to avoid having to play Sweden in the quarterfinals is to beat the living daylights out of France? Huh. France, c'est terminé pour toi.
Gold medal, let's go!
Welcome back to On the Fly. We're previewing these, predicting, and recapping World Junior Championships, our Men's World Championships, the Women's World Championship, the U18 Men's World Championship. Expect the unexpected.
Absolute abomination of the Canadian Junior Nationals.
I have a couple extra words I want to use in that one. And it's Freebird. Freebird, Freebird, Freebird. Of course, the Olympics are just around the corner. I'm going to coin it the rivalry day.
World Junior history!
Your home for international hockey. This is On the Fly. Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping Day 4 of the Men's Olympic Hockey event happening in Milano and Cortina, Italy. So we'll hop into today starting with the scores from today's games. We'll start here with a 5-3 victory for Sweden over Slovakia. Now coming into this game, some relatively noteworthy things to consider. The first is that for this game to actually help Sweden, not only do they have to win, but they also have to win by 3 goals. And so we get to this game, we get into the end, towards the end of this game, and Sweden is up by 3 goals. And then they take a penalty, and Lucas Raymond with a retaliatory penalty, slashing a guy after he had a little bit of roughhousing. And then what ended up ensuing was, of course, the Slovaks get their 3rd goal, and then all panic starts to set in. And one of the beautiful parts about these tournaments, and you can really look at any IIHF tournament, that's the joy of covering these, is that we're not necessarily new to the fact that goal differential becomes so important. And we saw it today with the fact that they had to pull their goalie well in the middle of the game and being up by 2 goals, and they're still pulling their goalie. Because, once again, for the Swedes, the only way that this game really mattered to them, and yes, you can get into the nitty-gritty of it and say, well, the standings mattered because, once again, you look down the line, you look kind of into the future, seeding matters, so yes, you can say it mattered for them, but the only thing that mattered for the Swedes today was, could they pull off the 3-goal win? And of course, they didn't. You can see the score beside me. It's a 5-3 final. And for the Swedes today, I thought that you see their first 2 periods, they were pretty close with the Slovak team. Then the 3rd period rolls around and the game shifts to a more offensive approach. The offensive approach normally favors the Swedish team, especially with the way that they're built. And so for the Swedes today, I did think that their game was good enough to take it home. Unfortunately, just got a little bit away from them at the end, and you take the penalty. Probably not your favorite penalty to take, but it was one that is very likely going to end up haunting them. And you look at what's to come. They are the 3rd seed in Group B now, which means that, and they'll probably end up being the top 3rd seed out of all the other groups, which means that they're the 7th ranked team across the tournament, which then, if you keep going down that train of thought, means they're going to play the 10th overall team in the qualification round, which also goes on to mean that they're going to play the 2nd seed in the quarterfinals at this tournament, which is going to be either Canada or the US in that 2nd seed. And so for the Swedes, all of a sudden, this tournament has gone from a high up look, and they lose yesterday to the Finns, and that was a bit of a tough game for them. But all they needed to do today was win by 3 goals or more, and they retained the top spot in the group. And all of a sudden, in the span of 2 minutes, they take a penalty, lose the lead, and then lose their chance at the top seed, end up in the 3rd spot, and then all of a sudden, in many ways, it feels like they lost the tournament. And so for Sweden, they end up with the win, not necessarily what they were hoping for. And as for the Slovaks today, on the contrary side of it, for them, they were just hoping to stay as high as they could in the group. And credit to them today, it was a well-fought win. It was a loss, but a well-fought win for them, especially with the way that they played, because they knew what they were going into. They knew that they had a bit of a cushion that they could play with. And when the game got desperate towards the end and the Swedes started to play their game, we saw the Slovaks continue to kind of fight back. They had some good looks, just couldn't really capitalize at the end. They had good goaltending in net all day. Hlavai once again performed exceptionally well for the Slovak team. All signs of good things to come as they look forward in this tournament as the number 1 seed in the group. It is a big deal for them. They get a much easier path through now, where you're looking ahead. They're going to come in that 3rd spot most likely. There's still some tiebreakers and what-ifs that could change that, but they should end up as the 3rd seed overall throughout this tournament. They get the quarterfinal bye, then they get a bit of an easier road down the line at the rest of this tournament. The 6 versus 11 game, we'll see which teams end up filling out there. It's likely going to either be the winner of the Czech-Swiss game. You could also see the team out of Group C as well be that team, and I think that's who you'd much rather play. Whether it's Latvia, whether it's Germany, whether it's the Danes, all those teams could very well end up in that second spot in Group C. Lots to play for the Slovak team, and all of a sudden this tournament has a lot more hope for them than it did at the start of the tournament, where it wasn't necessarily the best outlook for them. They were in a real tough group with the Finns and the Swedes. They weren't going to be able to beat them both, and sure enough, we get to the day today, and they beat the Finns, and they did well enough against the Swedes to earn themselves the top spot. A big deal for the Slovak team, but 5-3 win today for the Swedes over Slovakia. Slovaks do exactly what they need to, and unfortunately for the Swedes today, just couldn't pull off the 3-goal margin. Then to the second game of the day between Latvia and Germany, and for this game, it was another kind of interesting game. And we've seen Germany so far at this tournament. They've played Denmark. They had a 3-1 win in that one, and that game I'd say was a bit of a similar game to today. The only difference is that Latvia doesn't miss chances when you give them the opportunities. And for today, for Germany, they made quite a few mistakes, and most of them ended up in the back of their net. And once again, the Latvian team is a very defensive structured team. They focus defense first, transition it back onto offense, especially when you make mistakes. That's how they kind of utilize that trap defense. And we saw numerous chances early on in this game, and really throughout, where the Germans made a mistake, it came back and it ended up in a breakaway attempt or some form of 2-on-1 odd man rush coming back the other way. And you look at the Latvian side, that's what they're known for. That's what they're good at, and that's what they do. And for teams like Germany, when you play teams like Latvia, you need to make sure you clean up your game and play a full 60 minutes, because of what happens today ends up happening. You can't give teams that kind of leash and that kind of opportunity in these games. But credit to Latvia today, they pull out a big win and a huge 3 points in the standings as they now look to try and pull off some upsets and find their way as the second seed in the group, get themselves, if they are trying to target it, if you look kind of that goal differential route, they're trying to earn their spot as that kind of team that's going to end up playing the Slovaks. They're looking for that 6th-ish place role, and if they can do that, they will be just fine in this tournament. Something to definitely keep an eye on as we do move forward. We'll move to the third game now of the day. Once again, a 4-3 win for Latvia over Germany, but the third game between Finland and Italy. And that score kind of speaks for itself. An 11-0 win for Finland over the Italians today. Coming into this one, we talked pretty extensively on it about the relationship between the old Finnish coach, the current coach of Italy, and how well the Finns know their own system. They've been playing it for years, and what better team to beat the system than the one who's been playing it for years, knows how to beat it, and once again has played it long enough that you know all the gaps within it. So for the Finns, not necessarily surprised by this score, maybe a little bit by how bad it ended up getting, but you look at this game for the Finns, it was a dominant performance. They didn't give Italy any life. They played exactly as they needed to as the better team, as the team with more structure, as the team with more skill to be able to play that style of game. They played it to nearly perfection today, and the score certainly speaks for itself with the offensive side. An 11-0 victory for Finland over Italy in the third game. Then to the last game of the day, where this game was a bit of a mess as well for the U.S. I mean, I don't even know if you're happy with this performance. You come into this game, you know well that if you all of a sudden it's a battle for goal differential between you and Canada to avoid having to play Sweden in your eventual quarterfinal matchup, and you have arguably one of the worst goaltending performances that you could have had in net. And not to take away from the rest of this game, because unfortunately for Jeremy Swayman, he just kind of earned his way into the spotlight today. He played well outside of a few really bad kind of saves or shots, where there's the one at the end of the second where it was a shot from the point that kind of flubbered in. You have the one from the red line, which is always a tough goal to allow. And then you have the one where it kicked off your own teammate's skate. And The 3 goals today for the Danes were all very avoidable goals for this U.S. team. And those are the opportunities that you may look back on after you get knocked out by the Swedes in the quarterfinals that you wish you would have had back. And so for the U.S., they, at least in my eyes, they wish that they could have had that opportunity back. I think you look at this game, it was always going to be an offensive game. They struggled and they played very poor hockey early on in this one. They gave the Danes a lot of life. They gave them far too many opportunities, and especially weak chances going back the other way. The U.S. then kind of picked up their game towards the end, but that early stage was an opportunity for them to really run up the score and then get that goal differential that they so much sought. As of right now, they're a +7 as far as goal differential goes. They will play, of course, Germany tomorrow. On the other side of the bracket, you have Canada with a +9, and they're about to play France first tomorrow. And so we'll see what kind of score they can put up. The U.S. will then respond. And then becomes the question, well, do you do what Sweden did back in 2006? And do you kind of let the game go a little bit? All of a sudden, you're not throwing games, but you're tactically losing games to try and earn your way back. It is definitely frowned upon to do, but in the same time, would you rather play the Swedes or would you rather play someone else in the qualification round and then earn your way back in? It is a question to definitely be answered for this U.S. team. But for the Danes today, they earned their opportunities. They still scored some goals, and they made this game a lot more interesting than it probably should have. You looked at their goaltending and net, which I'd say was decent enough. Definitely kept this game alive early on, and a lot of people are saying, well, the Danish defense is so good. They didn't do all that well in my eyes, at least. The U.S. team struggled early on to get themselves going, but they were still generating pretty high-quality opportunities that just weren't hitting the net. For the Danes, unfortunately for them today, they do end up on the other side of this game. They did keep it tighter than probably what it should have been, but still a loss in the column. The U.S. does take this one 6-3, picks up the 3 points in the Group C standings. But we'll now shift over to the news, and we'll start here with Sweden with, is it a win or lose? And you look at it, the overall arching problem for today was they needed to win by 3. They needed to win by 3 goals, get themselves a tiebreaker, and then try and earn their way back up. And unfortunately for them today, that last goal at the end of the game was the one that costed them potentially a chance at this tournament. And all of a sudden, the entire complexity of the standings shifts so much more rapidly. And so for the Swedes today, obviously you would have liked to have won by 3, by 4, by 5, guaranteed yourself a chance to get that quarterfinal bye. But in the end, and what we saw was it just wasn't in the cards. Unfortunately for the Swedes today, although they did win, they ended up losing the day. Then to the second part with Slovakia, who is now the #1 team in Group B. They have earned the bye onto the quarterfinals, which is a huge deal for them. They will, of course, end up playing that 6 versus 11 game most likely, assuming none of the chaos doesn't fold over in Group C tomorrow, which once again could end up happening. Lots to talk about there, given that potential, which should be interesting to monitor whether or not the U.S. does give the Germans a better chance than what they probably should, which then leads on to Germany with mistakes. And you're going to go up against a real tough U.S. team tomorrow. If you continue to make the mistakes you did today, you're going to get buried, and especially for a U.S. team that is in the hunt for goal differential, you don't want to end up on the wrong side of this game because there are other implications at stake that goes beyond just coming in that 3rd spot in the group. All of a sudden you could end up as that 4th seed and potentially have a much tougher road than what you might anticipate. Then to Latvia with don't sleep on them. And I know for this Latvian team, they started rough against the US team. This Latvian squad, though, is always a team that causes problems at these tournaments. And they're not necessarily that blow-it-away team, and they never have been. They're a good structured hockey team who knows when to play defense and jumps into the rush like no one else's business with the potential to score a lot of goals. And so for Latvia, that's the kind of game you expect from them. But when you go and play them, they frustrate you to no one else's end. And so that's the kind of game you need to look for from a Latvian team. And obviously they're going to go play Denmark tomorrow. Whether or not they're favorites, I still do give them the edge in our prediction. We gave them the edge. I'd say that's going to continue into tomorrow. But this game is arguably one of the most important games for Latvia, so they can find themselves into that second spot in the group, it makes their life a lot easier. Something to definitely keep an eye on there for the Latvians, but don't sleep on them. Then to the Finns with systems, and today was more of that systems type day. You understand the systems, you're probably going to do pretty well. And for Finland today, having played that Jukka Jallonen system for years, obviously they're not going to have too much of a problem with it. An 11-0 win at that, which then leads to Italy with ouch, and they got beat by 11 goals today. Never is going to feel good, and for Italy especially, who is now looking at kind of that last spot in the group, whether or not the French end up catching them. It's an 8-goal margin right now, -7 versus -15. We'll see, of course, whether or not they are going to be able to catch up. For Italy, with ouch today. Then to Denmark with, is it puck luck or is it something else? And I think for the Danes today, there was a lot of puck luck on their side. You think to that game against Germany where it was a bit of the opposite problem, where for in that German game, they didn't really have that puck luck. They didn't be able to get those high quality chances. They just didn't find the back of the net off those. And so for the Danes today, the puck luck was with them, but unfortunately, the chances that they had against Germany just weren't. Danes today with a lot of puck luck, unfortunately didn't turn out to be a final result. And then the question arises for the U.S. around their goaltending. And we talked about it coming into the tournament. We've talked about it as well in the team preview, the prediction, and as well the tournament preview about for this U.S. team, what was going to be the situation with the goaltending, because they do have the advantage over teams like Canada coming into the tournament. I will say I have been very impressed with Canada's goaltending, which is another reason why they are now the number one in our power rankings, which we release every night or every morning or every day. But you look at it for the U.S. team, and I think the question becomes even more apparent now because we've seen what Hellebuck can do. I wouldn't say he looked terribly great. He was good enough, but he was not great in any sort of the word. Swayman today didn't look all that great either. And then the question becomes, do you give a guy like Jake Ottinger a chance tomorrow against the Germans? Because you haven't really found your goaltender yet. And I think Connor Hellebuck is the end goaltender in this situation. We'll see whether or not Ottinger gets his chance tomorrow against Germany, because that could be a very interesting game. And whether or not, once again, you're trying to throw that game, or quote unquote throw that game, of course you can't actually say you're throwing it, you do need to figure out what the goal of this team is as far as their goaltending goes, because it's going to be a tough sled. And you're going to, once you get into that quarterfinal round, if they end up getting the bye, you're likely going to end up playing the Swedes. And so you won't have that extra game to kind of figure it out. And so whether that's going to Hellebuck right away in their game tomorrow against the Germans, whether it's going to Ottinger to give him his tryout period, see if he gets hot, and then if he doesn't get hot, it's a coin flip type performance where you look across the board and say, well, which guy was really the best goaltender we have? And I think Hellebuck likely is going to end up being that guy, but the question still has to be asked because Swayman did relatively underperform his expectations today, a few soft goals. He did pick it up towards the end, but I think those early goals are definitely inexcusable. And when you get to a game like the Swedes, you give up those chances, and unfortunately, you just can't have that if you're the U.S. team. And so the goaltending situation for the U.S., definitely in question as we move into, of course, the playoff rounds, and tomorrow is the last day of the preliminary round. So the time for decision is definitely shrinking. But that will do it today for our news. We'll now shift over to the standings. We'll start here in Group A, where we'll see Canada in the top spot with 6 points. Switzerland and Czechia tied in second and third with 3. France in last place in the group with 0 points, 2 regulation losses. Then to Group B, where we'll see Slovakia in the top spot with 6 points. Finland in second spot with 6 points. Sweden in third spot with 6 points as well. And then Italy in last place with 3 regulation losses for 0 points. Then over to Group C we go, where we'll have the USA in the top spot with 6 points. Latvia in second with 3 points with the win over Germany today. They hold the tiebreaker. The Germans are in third with 3 points. And then Denmark in last place with 0 points, 2 regulation losses for them. As far as what's happening for tomorrow, some key things to keep an eye on. Group B is set. There's no more games to be played over in Group B. So your final rankings there, once again, Slovakia in first, Finland in second, Sweden in third, and then Italy in last spot. Group A is a very simple part as well. Canada cannot move. They hold the tiebreakers over both Switzerland and the Czechs. France can't move either. they will look once again, because they don't hold the tiebreaker, over Switzerland and the Czechs. And then the beautiful part about the second and third spot is the winner takes the second spot, the loser takes the third spot. And so Group A, very easy. Group B, very easy as well. And then we shift to a little bit more of a complicated Group C, where once again, you look to kind of a few different key tiebreakers that could very well cause some problems in the group. And you look especially, I'd say, at one spot in kind of that lower end spot, a lower end tier, where once again, the USA is going to play Germany, and then Latvia goes first, and then the USA ends up playing Germany. And so there's the potential for Denmark to end up in any one of second, third, or fourth spot with their potential games. If Denmark is able to win by 2 goals or more, and then the USA, as this is all assuming the US beats Germany in regulation time, then Denmark can creep up. If they win by 2 goals or more, they can go into that third spot. If they come fourth spot, or if they score 4 goals or more, they can end up in that second spot because of the tiebreaker. It comes down to goal differential between the 3 teams. Of course, Germany already has beaten Latvia, Latvia's rather has beaten Germany by the goal, and then Denmark and Germany have already played as well, the 3-1 victory for Germany in that one. And so the Danes, with a -2 rating right now, needs the 2 goals to get ahead of Latvia. So if they score 2 goals or 3 goals, what that means is Germany will come the second spot, Denmark will come the third spot, and then Latvia will come that last spot. So once again, you could see another situation where for the Danes, you get up by a goal in that game, whether or not you pull your own goaltender, or in the same respect, whether a team like Latvia pulls their goaltender. It could be a very interesting scenario, because you're banking on that 2-goal split. Something to keep an eye on there, whether or not they end up doing that. Then, of course, for teams like Germany, then you have to try and catch them with 4 goals, because for a team like Denmark, who's already lost by 2, you can't split even with them. And you also include the fact that Latvia's beaten them already, or Latvia just beat them today. You need 3 goals to catch up to Germany, and then you also need that 4th goal to put them over the edge. And so for the Danes, they need 4 goals to get ahead of Germany to get that second spot. Once again, this all assumes the US ends up beating Germany. You need 2 goals, or between 2 goals or 3 goals to get ahead of Latvia. Anything short of that will lead to Latvia and Germany being ahead of Denmark in the standings, and Denmark being the last spot. There also exists the possibility for the US to move by quite a bit in the standings tomorrow, and that comes down to how well their game against the Germans go. So if the US loses, assuming that, of course, Latvia ends up beating Denmark, which I'd say is fairly likely to happen in regulation, and Germany ends up beating the USA in regulation, then there's another case of the 3-way tie. So what we look for there is, because there's a +4 goal differential in the group right now between the US and Latvia. Latvia, of course, just beat the US by quite a margin in their game. Then, of course, you have Germany, and so how that ends up working out is in order for the US to stay in the first spot, they'd have to lose by 1 or 2 goals. To come in the second spot, they need to lose by between 3 goals and 7 goals. And how that would work is Germany would jump them in the standings. The USA would come second. Latvia would come third, regardless of how the final score goes in the game against Denmark. But Latvia, once again, would have to win that game in regulation to cause this three-way tiebreaker. If Latvia loses, Denmark wins their game. Germany beats the US in regulation. They would just jump them, and then you'd have that tiebreaker work itself out with the Danes. If they win in regulation, would jump ahead of Latvia. Germany would jump ahead of the USA, just based off points and tiebreakers, because both those teams would have the win over each other, and there wouldn't be any sort of 3-way tie. But there is one more caveat to the fact that the US can actually drop to that third spot in the potential of that 3-way tiebreaker if Germany ends up beating the US by 8 goals. Once again, very unlikely it happens, but it is still a possibility. Germany would then come the top spot, Latvia would come the second spot, and the USA would be in the third spot in the group. So those are just the overarching kind of what-if scenarios for tomorrow. There are quite a few of them, so be sure to follow us on all our social media platforms, where we'll break all of that down for you. You can follow us on Twitter in particular at OnTheFly1515, which will give you a pretty overarching angle as soon as that first game is done between Latvia and Denmark, because once that game's done, you have a better sense of what the tiebreakers could look like. especially as we take a look over those kind of two main three-way tiebreakers we look at, whether or not there's also just the fact that if Denmark beats Latvia, Germany beats the US, those are the other kind of obvious ones that we take a look at. But we'll shift over now to tomorrow's games and kind of what to expect. February the 15th, we'll start here at 6:10 a.m. Eastern Time between Czechia and Switzerland. This game, once again, will decide what goes on over in the Group A standings for that second and third spot. The winner gets the second spot, the loser gets the third spot. And it's also a matter of goal differential for them as well. You look across the way over in Group C, where you're going to be competing on goal differential with those teams to try and earn that fifth or sixth spot, depending on which spot you want. Very unlikely they get the fourth spot, especially with the performance today from the Finnish squad, where they decided to go full ham. Of course, they got the 11-point margin now of goal differential, and so they're likely not going to get caught by either of these teams. And so you're kind of competing as far as the second place go for the fifth and sixth seeds respectively. And so for the Czechs and for the Swiss, this will be a very tight game. You look to these two teams, two very solid teams that I'd say haven't necessarily had the tournament they'd hoped for, but they're still playing really good hockey. There's some injuries to the Swiss squad as well, which will be a bit of a red flag going into this one. We'll see how much there's an impact there. Dennis Malgin's one that I'm looking at. If he is available to play, it hasn't been completely reported yet whether or not he will be out for the game against the Czechs or not. If he's able to play, it should be the Swiss will have a much better shot at winning this game. If he's out, you'll look to players to try and step up, and I don't know if the Swiss are going to be able to find that. I think in the end, regardless if Malgin plays or not, the Czechs end up taking the game. But especially if Malgin doesn't play, the Czechs might end up being able to put up a few more goals, and that spread might become a little bit more apparent. I'm taking the Czechs early on here, 6:10 a.m. Eastern. Then the second game of the day between Canada and France, 10:40 a.m. I don't know if this game is going to be as bad as it looks on paper. You take into the fact that, once again, we talked about it off the intro, the French Canada needs the goal differential, and the French are the only team that's standing in their way between a first seed and a second seed, where you have to go play the Swedes. For Canada, I expect them to come out guns a-blazing in this game and likely end up taking this one by quite a margin. Wouldn't surprise me to see double digits. Wouldn't surprise me to see that number creep up into 11, 12, 13, 14 goals. But it also wouldn't surprise me for the French to find their magical game like they've played in second periods for most of this tournament, where they all of a sudden find ways to shut down the other team. We'll see whether or not, especially against this Canadian squad who has offensive galore for firepower, if they are able to shut them down. Something to keep an eye on tomorrow, 10:40 a.m. Eastern between Canada and France. Then to the third game of the day between Latvia and Denmark. We talked about it already, about the implications for the final standings. But for this game, look for it kind of be that offensive versus defensive type mindset. We saw Latvia play extremely well today against Germany. The Danes and the Germans play relatively similar styles. And so we'll see whether or not that carries forward. We saw the Danes play a real good game against Germany earlier in the tournament. Didn't quite get the results they were looking for. And we'll see whether that has any implication today or tomorrow's games for the Latvians, because the Latvians play a very defensive style, so it's that conflicting offense versus defense type system. We'll see which squad ends up pulling through. My slight edge does go to Latvia in that one. Then to the last game of the day between USA and Germany, 3:10 p.m. You look to this game, and it's going to be a bit of a dogfight for these teams. And you might look at it on paper, go, well, the US should win this game. But it's also about by how many goals are they going to win this game, because the goal differential matters. And you take into the fact that Canada's going to play France in the morning. The U.S. is going to know what that goal total is that they're going to need if they want to go through and try and avoid that second spot in the group. Whether or not the U.S. ends up throwing this game becomes the other question, where, maybe they do, maybe they don't. A reminder of what you're kind of looking for there is if Denmark ends up beating Latvia, then if Germany beats the U.S., the Germans will end up in the top spot in the group. And so you look for the U.S. team to kind of play their first period out and then get back to the locker room, see what's going on in that other game, and whether or not they need to win this one, or if they need to lose it by a bigger margin if Latvia gets the regulation win, because then all of a sudden all chaos starts to break loose. Should be fairly exciting to keep an eye on tomorrow for this US-German game. Two teams that are going to be in an offensive dogfight. I do still favor the US team, but if they do need to lose it all of a sudden, and we see it at that kind of second period, come out after the first intermission, don't be surprised to know what happened at that intermission, because they go back, check their phones, and realize what they have to do to avoid the Swedes. Something to keep an eye on there. I'm not saying they're going to do it. I'm not saying that they have to do it. I'm not saying that they're even thinking about doing it. But it is still a very real possibility, because you don't want to go through the impossible teams early on in this tournament. You want to avoid having to play teams like Canada and the US and the Swedes early on, because if you play them, you have a less likely chance to even get to a medal game at this tournament. But once again, Canada plays France in the early morning. You'll know what the goal differential number you're going to need is. And then probably by the end of that first period, you're going to have a better sense of, well, are we going to need to win this game or lose this game by more to avoid that second spot, that second seed, which will end up playing the Swedes. Something to keep an eye on there over in the Group C. But your games of the day for tomorrow, we're going to have Czechia and Switzerland, your opener, 6:10 a.m. Should be a real good game between these two, a dogfight for the second and third spot in the Group A. Latvia and Denmark as well. A huge game over in Group C with huge implications on the standings. And then I might throw a sneaky one in there with the USA and Germany. Could become a very interesting game, especially depending on what happens with the US goaltending tomorrow, whether or not they decide to play their best, whether or not they decide to play their worst. You'll have a pretty good sense whether or not they think they're going to be able to achieve the whatever goal differential Canada puts out in the morning. But that will do it today for our scheduled content. We'll now move into viewer questions. We do put a poll on our Twitter, X, and YouTube page asking for your thoughts and opinions on the day. We'll start with one from Yikabobs, who says, Finland understood the assignment and made sure to secure the spot in the quarterfinals as the best second place team. And that's exactly right. And you look at what the implications are for the overall standings. You want to come in the top 4 spots because it means you get to bypass the qualification round, get an automatic bye to the quarterfinals. And for the Finns today, with them blowing out the Italians, it also means that they secured, most likely, there's still some games to be played, but realistically looking at the goal differential and what's to come, very unlikely that the Finns end up getting caught. And that's going to be one of the biggest things to keep an eye on is, if you're the Finns, are you going to be able to beat whatever team comes out of the 5 and 12 game? The 12th spot is likely going to either be Italy or France. I don't see that any of the teams over in Group C catching up to that. In the other side, you're looking at the 5th place team, and whether that's the Czechs, whether that's the Swiss, whether that's the mismatch over in Group C, could be an interesting game as well for the Finns coming out in that quarterfinal game, which, once again, big deal for them, getting to the quarterfinals automatically. You're going to end up getting a weaker opponent, which is a huge deal for them. We'll see whether or not they are able to keep their success going. Obviously, a tough start to the tournament, losing to the Slovaks, but I think in the end, it actually might have helped them a little bit more than hurt them, because you're going to end up losing, likely, assuming the rest of this tournament plays out as planned. You're going to lose either the US, Canada, or the Swedes off the opening rip. Gives yourself a pretty good chance at a medal, so something to keep an eye on there for the Finns. Then we'll go to the second comment from today from Lego Sport Highlights, who says, can France be kind of a problem for Canada because they played pretty well versus Czechia? And it is a fair question, but I think it's also the fact that you look at this Canadian team so far at this tournament. They've blown through both the Czechs and the Swiss, two teams that are exceptionally good and very well were competing for gold medals at this tournament, and frankly still are, and especially with how diverse now these standings are going to be. I would say that line of thought still carries forward, and it will be interesting to see whether or not the Canadians are able to come out tomorrow and really take it pedal to the metal, because they need a win in a very bad way. They need to keep that goal differential up to try and discourage the Americans from playing their best against the German team. We'll see whether or not they're able to do it. They have the opening game. Something to keep an eye on. If they can get to that 10-goal margin against the French, don't expect the U.S. to be able to pull that off against Germany. But it is worth mentioning that the French are still a good team. They play some pretty good defensive hockey from time to time. We'll see if it can continue against the Canadians tomorrow. We will go now to the third comment and last comment of the day from Picosick SK, who says, what do you think of the refs in the men's hockey? It honestly sometimes stinks of corruption the way they ref the matches. And it is a fair question. I think it wouldn't be a IIHF tournament without someone complaining about refereeing. It's just the joy of it. Every year, there's always something new about it. And I wouldn't say that this tournament has been all that bad. And yes, I know where that's coming from, especially with the name, with the SK at the end for Slovakia. But you look at the game yesterday against the Italians, and yes, there were some calls that probably should have been called that weren't called. But this tournament is probably one of the better officiated tournaments, to be completely honest with you, because they're not calling all the soft stuff we've seen from years past, especially on the IIHF level, where they're kind of utilizing some of the NHL rules where it's a little bit of a tougher game. You know, we've seen Canada take some pretty good runs at players so far. Look at guys like Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon, who aren't necessarily known for that big hit mentality, but yet they are still doing that. And so I think it kind of encourages, especially some of the smaller teams, to be able to play physical and be able to push teams around. That's really important for kind of those upset type games, and we'll see whether or not it continues. I have enjoyed the consistency, I will say, at this tournament. It's been pretty good as far as not calling much. We'll see. Obviously, I hope it continues into the medal rounds, because the farther this can go, the better it's going to be for underdog teams, the better it's going to be for upsets at this tournament. And we saw it even today with the Danes, where that's the kind of game you want to see, is an underdog team going up against the U.S. You really never know until the final whistle goes. But that's the beauty of these tournaments, is really anything can happen. A big day coming up tomorrow, the final day of preliminary round action. Be sure to come back. We'll break it all down for you. But with that, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. Please drop a like. If you really consider subscribing, tell all your friends going down below your thoughts on day 4 of the men's Olympic hockey event. Until next time, see you.